Welcome to the Beacon Hill Podcast, helping you grow in your faith and shine for Christ. Thanks for joining us. Now here are your hosts, Pastor G.J. Farmer and the Beacon Hill Baptist Church staff.
Welcome back to the podcast. We took a week off last week, kind of a crazy week for everybody with Easter and then spring break and all of that, but we're back today. Everybody feeling rejuvenated?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was super busy for you last week with all the kids stuff and outreach
stuff. We did a lot of, we had all the Easter stuff going on here at church, and then we turned right around Easter Sunday and drove to South Carolina, spent some time there, drove back. We did drive with one cat and a dog, so that was fun, and 4 kids, 5 kids. So.
And you had a big day this week when you got to see the eclipse.
Yeah, man.
He was the only one on staff with glasses.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you're listening, I'm here with Jessica and Joel.
Hey, everybody. Yeah. I can see today. I don't know. You were like running into things. I think you might have looked directly into it yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about you.
I actually did look up for like half a second, and then I was like, oh, probably shouldn't do this. But
yeah,
it is kind of tempting.
Too.
I don't know why it's so tempting.
And then Jake and I were Googling, like, different ways you could look at it, like through your phone or through this. Is this safe? And then we just missed the whole thing. So
yeah, well, maybe you enjoyed. Josh went to Totality in Cincinnati.
You got the full experience.
Yeah. So if you go to the church, go up to Josh and ask to see his photos because he was showing them off this week in the office. He got the full experience. Yeah. Well, we started a new series this week called Family Matters, and Joel has he always has interesting conversation starters.
Yeah, I try to.
If you know 90s TV shows, you know Family Matters.
Yeah.
Your favorite episode is the one where Steve gets saved, I think.
I haven't actually seen that one, but it sounds like a good episode.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
It's good.
Yeah. Well, the question I had, because, Family Matters, the TV show, got me thinking, if you could be adopted by any TV family, who would you like to be adopted by? What family would you like to join?
So I haven't thought about this too much. Jessica said she has. But before, because I'm going to start thinking, do cartoon families, are they included or not?
Sure.
Just across the board if they're on TV.
We can do that.
I'm not sure I'm going to go cartoon.
Yeah, you can.
Man, now you threw a wrench in my plan here.
Maybe you just stick with what you thought of. I don't know. Because I've got to think here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Somebody's got to start talking. We can't have this silence here.
So I really like that show, The Middle. Have you guys seen that? The Middle?
I've not seen an episode. I know which one it is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the family is just so out there and crazy, and it just reminds me a lot of my family growing up and just like all my cousins and my aunts and uncles and stuff. And so I just think it's such a laid back family that I probably would love being in that family and laughing all the time and just having a good time. So The Middle. Now, if it was a cartoon one, I would want to be on Bluey. I want to be in Bluey's family.
Nice. So, they have fun.
They do have a lot of fun.
They're silly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joel, because I still need time.
So when I was a kid, I watched a lot of TV, a lot. Mm-hmm. And Nick at Night was a go-to for me. And I discovered a show called Different Strokes.
Yeah.
And that's who I'd want to join. I want Mr. Drummond to adopt me. Okay. I want to live in a New York penthouse. I want to know what Willis is talking about. I want to know.
I almost picked that show.
Really?
No lie. Yeah. I almost picked that show. That's so funny.
All right. So I think I would choose the Taylors from Home Improvement.
That was my other option.
It's a family of boys. So I'm assuming we're talking about being adopted as a kid.
Sure.
Right? Not adopting me right now.
Yeah.
So there's a family of boys, and they were always doing rough boy stuff. And the dad was always getting into trouble and mishaps and stuff. And I just feel like it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
To rough around with those boys and stuff. So
you have to have good medical insurance.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess you all know about Urkel and all that, but that's not what this Family Matters series is about. We're talking about different family relationship things every week. This coming week, we're going to be looking at marriage and what godly marriage looks like and things like that. But this past week, we were talking about what God's love looks like being displayed in our homes and how we should seek to love each other with God's love. We used 1 John chapter 4 as the passage, and I didn't have it marked here, so it's going to take me just a second. 1 John chapter 4, beginning in verse, I'll read all of it. It's kind of short. Verse 7 is where it starts. Dear friends, let us love one another because love is from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God because God is love. God's love was revealed among us in this way. God sent his one and only Son into the world so that we might live through him. Love consists in this, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, if God loved us in this way, we also must love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God remains in us, and his love is made complete in us. So we went through verse 12, kind of focused on three big ideas that, by the way, I threw this out last week to you, and you kind of laughed at it because it was like a double meaning, but I just went for it. The keys to unlocking a loving home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think you thought I would really go for it, but I did.
You did it.
Yeah.
You committed.
So we talked about knowing God's love, showing God's love, and growing God's love. And I'll say, like, when I first thought about these as kind of the big ideas, I thought, like, these things sound pretty simplistic, like obvious. But when you actually get down to doing them, it becomes more of a challenge, if we're honest, like to actually have these working in our homes the way that they should. So we talked about knowing God's love means that if we want to have God's love in our home, we have to start, like, as individuals, having a growing personal relationship with the Lord. And of course, that only comes through Jesus. John says here that we know love because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. And we see that love displayed in him and taught by him. Secondly, we talked about showing God's love, where that's a command where we are to just step up and show the love of God to others. But of course, that means in our homes as well. And that should look like God's love and not our love. And then lastly, we talked about how when we do these things, that God's love will be cultivated and growing in our homes. And through that growth, that will feed into knowing God more and showing his love more. And so it all kind of is a cycle that's completed. And verse 12 alludes to, it says his love is made complete in us. And so when it's complete, we have all these things going at one time. So in thinking about knowing God's love, I was trying to pull it back to the specific application for this week. For you all and myself, how have we seen, or have you all seen, your personal relationship with God having an effect on your family? And that can be whether it's in the place that it should be or shouldn't be. You know, how have you seen, or have you seen that affect your relationships within your family and different dynamics? What are your all's thoughts? Oh, and let me say out the gate before you answer, as we're thinking about this, one of the things that I challenged everybody to do, including myself, is to think about ourselves in these applications. We can get caught up sometimes of thinking like, well, my spouse, they're not loving me in this way, or my kids don't show love in this way, or my parents don't show love in this way, or whatever. But we have to start with ourselves. If we're going to bring God's love into our homes through us, then it has to start as an individual. So that's kind of how I want us to look at these questions is, you know, with your relationship with the Lord, how have you seen that affect your family in different ways? What are your all's thoughts?
Well, I can just say, for me, the closer I am to the Lord in prayer, Bible study, the more I see the fruits of the Spirit, you mentioned earlier before we started about the fruits of the Spirit, the more I can see that in our home as far as I go. Patience is something that I'm constantly asking the Lord for. And just in, just everyday life, the busyness that we go through in our household. And so I think for me, the closer I am to the Lord, I notice that I'm more patient, I'm more understanding, and I'm more calm in the moment, and not as quick to those things that I shouldn't be, anger and, just brushing off, okay, you're fine, and going off and things like that. I'm a little bit more open to my kids and talking and things like that, so that when I'm not doing those things, our home is a lot harder to handle, I guess. And it affects how I'm feeling, and how my response affects everybody else in the house and their attitude and things. And I know you said, think about ourselves, but that is when I don't have the patience, no one else has it. Mm-hmm. And especially with my kids, they're looking for me for that. And my husband. And so when we don't have it because we're not doing what we're supposed to do, or we're not where we're supposed to be with the Lord, then it's affecting everything else. And so it just kind of throws us all out of balance.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, I can see like different parts of my life. Like, for instance, you mentioned patience, or even if you say like anger, like being quick to anger or whatever, like if I'm not where I need to be throughout the day, because, I obviously work outside the home, if I have an interaction with somebody and it's not, that interaction affects me in a certain way that I'm like maybe upset about it or have a grudge about it or anything like that, if I don't take care of that in my heart, then I see that sometimes like coming into my house and affecting my house. It's like, I take those burdens and that junk home, and then, maybe it affects how I treat people, or affects, I guess a big one when you have kids is patience, but understanding and things like that. And so even relationships outside of our home, if those aren't right as far as the love and stuff, it can affect the relationships within our home. If our walks with the Lord aren't exactly as they should be, or if we're not having a godly attitude as we should.
Yeah. I can see, in my own home, when I'm not walking and knowing God's love as I should, it's affecting my intentionality with the rest of my family. I can be, if I'm having a rough day, instead of saying prayers with the boys before they go to bed, I'll just be like, I don't feel like it tonight. They can just go to bed. Or, seeing opportunities to talk about the gospel, teaching moments in our home, or just encouraging moments, instead of taking those opportunities when they come, just saying, I don't feel like it, or I don't even recognize them because my mind and my heart are not looking towards the things of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think on the flip side, we talked about kind of, I guess, the negative side of it more. But on the flip side, I found like when my relationship is the strongest with the Lord, I'm wanting to talk about him more at the house. I'm wanting to have those prayer times more with my kids. I'm wanting to spend that time making sure that they're learning and growing. And when that happens, I think it's, you see that flourishing all around. And, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we talk about what we love, and we talk about what we spend the most time with. So if we're not spending the most time with the Lord, we're obviously not going to talk about it. Yeah. And I think I'm not in all the sermons, so I don't get to hear everything all the time, but I do believe I heard you say at some point about keeping the gospel at the front. Like, you made an emphasis in that in a sermon. And what you were saying is, you're not going to take those moments to share the gospel if the gospel is not right in front of you and you're not in it every day and walking in it. And
yeah, and that's the thing is like, and that's really with knowing God's love, why it has to be a personal thing. Like if you haven't been impacted by the gospel, if you haven't been impacted by the love of God, you're not going to impact other people, because that's how the love of God flows through us and in us, is because we've experienced that. So just out the gate, a couple of things. One is, if you are thinking about your relationship with your family or thinking about your family dynamics, and you're like, yeah, they're really not as they should be, and there are a lot of shortcomings and stuff. Understand that everybody has things that happens behind closed doors that nobody really wants to talk about or really needs to know about, but that doesn't mean that things can't be better in the future. And it starts with, one step. I think sometimes we think, like, I know we all have kids and we think, well, if we haven't done a devotion with our kids all week, like, well, what's another night? Or, and it comes to a point that you're like, well, okay, we've got to start somewhere. So if you think about your family and you think, I've never done a devotion with my kids, never prayed with my kids, never talked about anything to do with the Lord, it might feel weird to like start into that, but I can tell you it's very rewarding. You got to start somewhere. But making sure your relationship with the Lord is right is how you find that love and encouragement to do that with your family.
And just a plug, if you're in kids ministry, I provide some easy ways to get that started every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from Hi-Fi. So
how do they get that?
On our Facebook page, our Beacon Kids Facebook page.
Okay, so there you go if you have kids. Also, we have a place that we're going to be opening very soon here in our store that's resource room kind of store where we sell resources to you, Christian resources at cost. And our goal is to provide various things that will help you grow. And I think one of the things that we're going to have in there when that opens, I'm hoping it's going to be either this Sunday or the next Sunday, is children's devotionals that you can read with them and some other things that will help you in your walks with the Lord. And we'll have a number of things in there dedicated to this specific series, marriage books. We've got some books on, purity, like singleness. I don't know, just different things. You have to go check it out. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that as well. If you need some resources, you can always contact us, and we'll be glad to hook you up. So knowing God's love, then showing God's love is important because we can't just know it. We are to show it, and that's a command. And we looked at, obviously in 1 John, it tells us to show the love of God, but we also looked at 1 Corinthians 13 and thinking about the definition of God's love and what that should look like. And we did look at this a few weeks ago as we were talking about loving one another within the church, but specifically loving others in our family. It should also look this way. It says, I'll just start at verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy. It's not boastful, arrogant. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not irritable. Doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and love never ends. It's important to have God's definition of love when we're trying to love people, but we know that this looks very different than the world's definition, or than sometimes than we want to define love. What are some of those things that stand out to you all that are like, okay, this is majorly different than how the world or we tend to define love if it's left up to just us?
The first thing that popped up to me is, in verse 8, where it says love never ends. A big thing we see right now in the culture is that a relationship only lasts as long as you feel loved or you feel like you're being fulfilled by the relationship. Where we see this picture of love is sacrificial. We know that relationships, people change, not just marriages, but we know children and those dynamics and all that change. And the big thing, our culture will tell you is if that relationship is not optimal for you, just cut them out, just end it. It needs to end. But what we see here is an idea of love is that sometimes loving someone is, sacrificing yourself, sacrificing, your convenience. Now, there are appropriate times with abuse and everything that some relationships do need to end, but we're talking about a selfish love where you don't feel like you're getting enough out of the relationship. And we see that love never ends.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about that even this week, like leading into these future sermons. I'm going to mention, likely from time to time, it's hard to have general advice and be able to apply it to every single specific instance. And so let me say also, like, since you mentioned abuse and other things, like if you're in a situation that you feel like you need, like your family could benefit from some kind of counseling or therapy, something like that, because it's a very specific type of thing that you're dealing with, like I would encourage you to seek that out and to talk to somebody about that. I'm happy to talk to people, but professional therapists and counselors who do that can really help with a lot of things. And so there are some times that is necessary. I also think, as we're thinking about loving others, that kind of takes different forms depending on the situation sometimes. There are times that, it says love, let me just read it again. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. There are times that we have to stand for truth and have to speak truth in a situation, rather than saying, well, I'm going to be like a doormat or whatever, or, just sacrifice myself. And, love takes on different forms. It's just like, I always knew my dad loved me, and sometimes that love was a punishment. Sometimes that love was a hug. It just depended on what was going on. And so I think with every nuance, you kind of have to think through, like, what would God's love and his wisdom look like in this? And if it's a situation that you need some further counsel, I would encourage you to get that. But other thoughts on this? What are, how does this look different than the world's love? We've already mentioned, like, patience. Love is patient. Sometimes we can be very impatient. Other thoughts?
Well, I was just looking at the self-seeking part, because I think right now we see a big finding our worth and finding love and how we feel about ourselves through social media. That's a big issue right now, I think, in a lot of not just kids, because it's going younger and younger, but it's in adults that we're seeking out what we think is love through how many likes we get or how many comments we get or things like that. And, that's not what it is at all. Mm-hmm. None of that is real. It's we put on there what we want to put on there, what we want the world to see, but it's not the real life, everyday love of, you're going to love me when things are good, and you're like the sacrificial love, and you're going to love me when things are, wrong, or I'm going to love you when things are not going so well. I just think it's thrown out there pretty big.
Yeah. One of the things I mentioned Sunday that I think is a big thing that I see, not just in homes, but also like in churches and like all relationships, I see there's a real issue sometimes when people jump to conclusions about what somebody meant or what they were thinking when they haven't had a conversation to iron that out. And I've noticed a lot of times, like people that I've counseled with even, they think that somebody thinks or did something because of a certain reason, but they hadn't talked about it to really see what was going on in that. And so therefore it creates animosity and friction both ways, because a conversation just hasn't happened. And I look at that part that says it believes all things. Like, to me, as I'm thinking about, like, if we're going to love people in our homes, our spouses, our kids, like, the first thing that I want to try to do or need to try to do is think the best of someone. Like, don't always assume the worst intentions from someone or whatever, because we all know people in our families or whatever, like, we'll have a text conversation and maybe something doesn't come through that, maybe we don't quite understand it, or maybe somebody does something that we haven't talked to them about why they did what they did, and sometimes we jump to conclusions on that, and then we get angry about different things like that. I see this both ways sometimes in my own life. Like with my kids, I see, in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, why did they do that? What were they thinking sometimes? But then I think back like as a kid, and I remember thinking like, what in the world are my parents thinking? Like, why in the world are they doing that? You know? And so it kind of goes both ways. And then when the conversations don't happen, then you get anger both ways. I don't know why they're thinking that, or I don't know why they're doing that. And then they're thinking the same thing about you. And that can happen with spouses. That can happen with kids and parents. That can happen with grandparents. And it can happen with everybody. And so that's one of the things I see. We've got to be different than how the world is. The world is all about, and I think that goes back to the self-centered thing. It's like, well, I'm right, you're wrong. So my thoughts about the situation are right, and it doesn't matter what you say or think. I don't know. I see that as a big one.
Adam and I have had that conversation about like, okay, we need to stop and look at it from our kids' point of view. Like, and also remember that they're kids, like, so when we're looking, we're like, why did my child do this? Like, I don't understand this. Okay, well, their thinking is not quite there yet, and we really need to get their perspective on it as well, because it may be something totally different, and now we've created this, there's this big issue and this, thing going on, this feeling like we're walking on eggshells with each other, but we've not just communicated with one another.
Yeah.
And just said, okay, well, let's hear what you have to say, and we'll tell you how we feel, and then let's try to figure out what's really going on.
And this is I think this whole series is going to be a little bit tough to talk about because everybody deals with stuff.
Yeah.
But it's often gone through my mind like, okay, I think that's one of the things that the devil like tries to put in preachers' minds is like, you can't preach on something until you're absolutely perfect in it. And if I legitimately felt that way, I would not ever be able to preach, And so I think sometimes we put in each other, or we get this thought in our minds together as a church, like, well, we can't talk about something, or we can't provide input on something unless we've got it all together. No, this is why we're here, is like, we all realize we struggle with stuff and we've got to get better. And there are some people who might have it a little more better than others, but we all have struggles, and so that's part of what we're doing with this series. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and you find the more people you talk to, the more you feel like, okay, I'm not the only one. Because we've had those conversations with some of our church members just to say, hey, like, how did you handle a situation, like this? And they'll tell us, what they did or that they had the same issue. And we're like, oh, thank you so much for not making us think like we're the worst parents in the world, or we don't know what we're doing, which sometimes we don't know what we're doing. We're, like you said, we're learning as we go. And so it's just nice to be able to have conversations with other people and realize, okay, like there's a lot of wisdom in that, but there's also a lot of comfort in knowing that you're not the only one.
Yeah. So in thinking about this, we all know the ultimate goal is that we know God's love, we show God's love so we can grow God's love in our homes. What is like the end goal of like, in what ways should our homes serve as a testimony to the world of what God's doing in our lives and in our families? And again, if we're all honest, like none of us have it all together, and there are moments that we're like, okay, the testimony we're putting out probably isn't what it should be. But what's the goal? Like what should that look like? How should the world see our families in our churches and think, man, what's up with that? What are your all's thoughts?
One of the big hopes for my family, because I struggle with this a lot, is, admitting when you sin, admitting when you're wrong. And so we struggle with this, but the ideal is just a family that are full of sinners, but are quick to just say, will you forgive me? Just a home that's filled with forgiveness and grace. And, that is, if we can have homes that are filled with that is just going to be a light to the world. Not a perfect family. There's plenty of people that put that message out there, but people that are not perfect, but love one another and point one another to Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when we had mentioned a moment ago, when we have the fruit of the Spirit in our lives, we're going to be loving more like this. And I think that's like when we love in the ways that God tells us to love, it's going to look so opposite from the world and a lot of things. People are going to be like, what in the world's going on there? But if we like really think about the love that we desire to have and to receive, it looks like God's love. Like that's the ultimate love that we desire to have and that we're longing for. But that's not often the love that we show or receive. And so when people see that love being displayed in us and through us, that's going to be, in a lot of ways, very attractive to people because that's how God has wired us to want that type of love. Other thoughts?
Well, I was going to say that's a big one in our home is forgiveness, and also just thinking about other people before ourselves. And just, I think, we've got a lot of boys in our house, and they're always in a rush to be first, and there's so much competition just in that aspect that I just would hope that we're teaching them that we need to put others before we put ourselves first, and that goes into everything that we do. That service would be a big part of our family.
Our families are such a big part of our lives. We've got a lot of different aspects to this series. Next week, or this coming Sunday, we're going to be talking about marriage, and then throughout there's going to be a sermon on forgiveness. There's going to be a sermon on being careful with our words and those kind of things, because I don't know about y'all, but some of the most hurtful things that can be said have been said within, not just my personal family, but like just in general family dynamics. And then I'm trying to think of some of the others just off the top of my head. We're going to have one about honoring your parents and what that means, and how that's not just a command for little children, that's a command for all children. And so a lot of different things coming up in this series, so you'll want to be a part of it. If you're not connected to a church, we'd love to see you at Beacon Hill this Sunday, 9:15 grow groups and 10:30 worship. Any other thoughts?
No.
All right. I feel like we need like a way to sign off. Like maybe we could get somebody to do like a dad joke at the end or a mom joke.
There you go.
How about not? We'll just sign off. All right. Hope you all have had a good week, and we'll see you Sunday.
You've been listening to the Beacon Hill Podcast. For more information about Beacon Hill Baptist Church, visit beaconhillbaptist.com.